course, there's this long tradition of our sacred items, you know, even our ancestors' bodies, you know, being stolen and put in institutions and kept in museums and kept in, you know, all of these, you know, kept in drawers and things like that. And, you know, going back to what we talked about relationship, I mean, it interrupts that relationship we have with those, you know, with those beings. So, you know, it's kind of this, we're coming up, I think next week is the 30th anniversary of NAGPRA in the States, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And, you know, there's not really something totally similar in Canada, but there has been, you know, there has been this movement to bring things back. And, you know, I think, you know, I remember going to the RCMP Museum in, I think, the late 90s, and, you know, being led to their storage in the basement and seeing, you know, my people's sacred items on these metal shelves, you know, just out in the open, and, you know, feeling the sense of like, these aren't supposed to be here. Like, these do not belong here. And, you know, when I asked about them, I got told, well, you know, some of our Northwest Mounted Police were really friendly with the Indians, and Indians gave them gifts, and these are the gifts that they got. And I'm like, well, I don't think we would give those away. You know? Like, I'm just like, you know.
Thank you for letting me know. However,
Yeah.
However.
It's like, oh, you know, and then doing a bit of research and seeing these items, you know, seeing the arrest logs, right? When, you know, it was illegal through the Indian Act for us to conduct ceremony, and, you know, knowing that these were confiscated items, right? And you know, there's lots of stories around that across North America of people, you know, whether it was collectors, sometimes it was Indian agents that were, you know, making the step. And so, yeah, the question absolutely needs to be like, why are they there? And when we go back to what you were talking about, Dan, with this notion of, for someone with ownership, right? And feeling that entitlement to that. And that's what these institutions did. We, you know, we're in I think in a long process now of slowly pushing back against that museum culture about what, you know, what actually belongs there, and under what circumstances was it taken. And, you know, there's been more and more relationships that have happened between communities and museums to try and work through some of this stuff, but it's complicated. But I do think it's important to know that some of the stuff there just doesn't belong there.